Alright, we're back. In the last video we broke down the hind quarter. Now I'm going to break down the front quarter. It's a little more involved because it's a little bulkier, but I think I'll get started by taking the tenderloins out. Tenderloins are located on the inside, a little bit bloody. I'll wash them off. As I go, I made a few arrangements in here just to kind of make my work area a little bit easier, a little better to use. Trimming away a little bit of this fat so that I can actually get at the tenderloin, the most tender piece of meat on an animal of any kind. Not very big on most, but well worth it because they are tender and lean. I'm just kind of taking multiple cuts, following the rib. Well, it's not a rib, it's kind of a back part of the backbone. Follow it around to the spine. And I'm taking just little cuts because I want to save as much of this meat as possible. It's good stuff. Any of you who ate a tenderloin would know that. Don't really want this bloody stuff. Most of this I'll just actually wash off. It's a little bit easier than trying to cut it off because generally that just makes a bigger mess. But I'll wash it off when I'm done cutting, and this will be a very nice tender piece of meat. Put that in my tray over here. Then I'm going to go and get the other one. I think I'm going to wipe a little of this off first. Kind of nicked it clean in it there. That's a shame. Anyway, I'm starting along the backbone this time and working down and out. Doesn't really matter how you get it off of the animal. Generally, cutting meat, depending on if you're left-handed or right-handed, or what your exact style, I guess we'll say, is. One side of the animal is generally easier for a person than the other side. Just pick some of this pieces of fat off. Tenderloin's made up of a couple different little muscles, and although it looks stringy, and actually, okay, it is kind of stringy, when you cut it this way. And that makes for, nice pieces that are nice and tender. My favorite is wrap them in bacon, throw them on the grill, or throw them in a pan just like they are. I just ate the sirloin off of that, pieces of sirloin off of that hind quarter that I was showing you in the last video. All I did is put a little olive oil in the pan, a little salt and pepper, and I'm here to tell you it was delicious. I fried it up for lunch. Clean my knife off here. The blood is naturally occurring on this animal. It's not like I'm transferring it from one to another, so it's not going to hurt anything, but I just like to keep it clean. Keep it as clean as you can. You reduce your chances of bacteria down the road. Now this, if you can see, this is where I shot and hit the deer with a bow. Went through, actually went right between the ribs. came out the other side and broke its leg. Now that's a pretty good wallop with an arrow. I am very pleased with the bow. Using 100% grain wasp broadhead on a Mission Craze bow. I haven't put it on a scale, but I believe it goes to 70 pounds, and I turned it up as high as I could get it the other day, right before I started hunting with it, because I wanted to get this sort of an impact. I'm just taking the front shoulders off. There's no joint holding the front shoulders on an animal. All it is muscle, sinew, and connective tissue. So you find a seam, of course. Go in there. If you cut and push away, very easy to do. Following the seams. There's going to be a little cleanup work on these shoulders because, you know, that's where it was hit. The thing about an arrow is mostly it's just a bruise. You know, that's a blood clots on there. It's not like a gun where you're blowing, damaging, bone apart. Much cleaner method of hunting, actually. I'm going to take this and set it over here because we're going to finish this rib cage. Now, I got quite a bit of fat here. I'm going to trim off. As I said before, don't really care for the fat on a deer. It is a little bit strong tasting, and it's actually hard to cook down. It's basically feels like it's waterproofing your mouth if you eat it. When I clean a squirrel, I try to get the fat off too. It's not quite the same, but it's a little bit. It's actually pretty yellowish, and squirrels are usually pretty lean unless they've been sitting at your bird feeder all winter, like a lazy squirrel. Although they still are quite delicious. So I'm just gonna follow the seam right here. This is not a huge piece of meat. It's kind of the beginning of the neck. Now, a lot of people won't mess with the neck because of the whole chronic wasting disease thing. Personally, I don't have a problem with it. I've actually cut the neck off like that, boiled it down in a pot, and it actually makes very good barbecue sandwiches. It's a really hard piece of meat to clean because all the grooves in the vertebrae and stuff. Now this is the damage that arrow did, where it went in. It looks really bad, really bloodshot and whatever, but if you take your knife under the seam, again the seams, what do you know, I seem like I talk about the seams a lot, don't I? There's a reason for that, because that's the best way to do it. That's the best way to cut. You just go pick up a piece of meat and start hacking on it. Anybody can do that. You end up, you got a bunch of meat cut up, but what do you got in the end? You don't know. You got a pile of meat that has been hacked apart by some amateur and doesn't look as good. It's not going to have the same quality, because if you're not cutting the proper direction of the grain, you end up with a tougher piece of meat. Now, every piece of meat has grain, every piece of meat has a proper and an improper direction. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but this meat grain runs this way. Now, if I wanted to take this piece and fry it, yeah, it's going to be a little bit tough. It's just a little thin neck piece of meat. But if I was to take it and cut it this way, now I've cut across the grain. You look at that, you see the end grain of the meat. When that cooks, that's going to be little short pieces of meat. This we're going to grind though. All these little trim pieces that you'll see me take off of here is going to be for grinding. Now this I flip around. Notice when I get under that little membrane, it's nice and clean. Cut that off. Get rid of that blood clot, and I've got a nice lean piece, well, not lean, but I will have a nice lean piece of meat. I can almost take my thumb and actually peel the meat away from the fat. I plan on hunting later in the year. They will be much fatter then, and I will think that I will save the fat and render it down. I might actually, when I'm all done cutting, I might go back and cut the fat off of this, and then the bigger pieces, and freeze it, and then I'll render it down, and when I get enough for a big pot of fat, I'll cook it up. I'm just going back and taking what I can off of the neck. You know, there's not, if you're not going to cook down the neck, there's not a whole lot you're going to get off of it. It's a, you know, you get a big buck, all you can do is, if you're going to save it, all you can do is cook it down. The neck at the end of the rut's going to be 5 times its normal size, and it's going to be 10 times as tough. Does, they don't do that. Bucks get tough because they rub it on trees, they rub it on bushes, the ground. Sometimes they'll dig up with their antlers and fighting. All those things make their neck swell, make their neck tough, the meat in it. And again, I wipe the blood up. I just don't want to have excess blood in the meat. Now this is a piece that surrounds the windpipe. There is a thin bit of meat on there. Some people don't want to take the time to cut that off. But when you're blessed with an animal from God, you know, you should take advantage of that animal. I wish I knew about tanning and all that, because I would definitely do it. I would use the hide for something. I don't know about it, so I will end up probably donating the hide from this deer. There's many places around that take them for, to be honest with you, I don't know what they make out of them, but it's some charities. Maybe they make clothes for kids or shoes or something, I don't know. See, that's the windpipe. Got some blood clots around it. This was a long shot deer. So I'm going to just take this little side string of fat off. Maybe not even all the way off, but just so I can peel back at this neck. Now here I got more neck meat. As you can see, it's very hard to get in there. And I actually think I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to cut it off of there, or cut the rest of the animal away from it, and I'm going to boil it down. It's just, the best way to do it because you're getting the most out of what you have. This is actually a cow or beef animal. Your brisket area. This front of the neck. A deer isn't really built quite like a cow. So doesn't really have the briskety chunk of meat. It's actually, if it did, it still wouldn't really be desirable because a brisket is quite a fatty cut of meat, and it's probably more fat than it is meat. And on a cow, that's fine. It tastes good. You make, it's where corned beef comes from a lot of times. Corned beef brisket. But on a deer, you don't really like the fat, so it's not going to be as good. Now here I'm just taking out some rib meat. Some deer have a lot, some don't. I try not to take the inside deer meat or rib meat because it's been contaminated. You know, I didn't cut a gut or anything on here, and naturally the animal protects the meat, not by choice, it just by design. It protects it with membranes, and it's quite clean inside like a human is. But once you cut an animal up, you open it up to bacteria in places where the gut has been or waste has been, is going to be the first areas to spoil and to be affected by bacteria. So you kind of try to avoid eating that. This is a little bit of fat in there I don't really want. I'm going to cut it off. And then cut it up. You don't have to cut it up this small, depends on how big your grinder is. I cut mine a little smaller so I can feed it into the grinder quicker. Another piece of meat there. That's the other side of the deer where the arrow actually came out. Now that's going to be in a little bit worse shape. It's got a little bit more blood. You can actually see the triangular shape of the arrow on the exit wound. Now, I don't take the meat right by the exit wound because that meat is passed through the guts. Now on this deer it passed through the lungs, but it brings some of that material out with it. And although lungs I don't believe are going to hurt you, it still has passed through, and it still opens up the path for bacteria. So we'll throw that away. Entrance wounds are kind of the same. Generally it's hair and dirt. I don't think hair and dirt are really that harmful to a person. We eat plenty of dirt when we're kids, and I'm sure hair is no different. It's not like I go out looking for clumps of venison hair or anything to eat, but I think you get my point. Now, since I am going to be saving the neck, I'm going to just take this windpipe off because I am not eating that. Cut this little chunk of fat here. There's actually some probably the carotid artery. I'm no doctor, but I would guess that's what that is, causing all this blood. Now I'm going to take this and turn it. And generally I do this on a hanging animal, so it would be a little easier. Last night was warm, so I actually had to quarter this animal and put it in a refrigerator that I have outside. But when it's hanging, it's a little bit easier sometimes. The whole pulling away thing and the whole, you know, you can just kind of fillet her down.